Long ago, in the lush valley of Gandhara, nestled between snow-capped mountains and watered by two great rivers, there stood a kingdom unlike any other. It was famous not for its warriors, its scholars, or even its bountiful harvest, but for its gates, grand, towering, and endlessly multiplied by the will of its eccentric king. Every city in his domain had more entrances than houses, each gate an architectural marvel, but the king wasn't done. He dreamed of one gate to surpass all others, a monumental masterpiece that would be a testament to his obsession and the envy of neighboring kingdoms. And so he summoned architects from distant lands, challenged them to design the world's greatest gate, promising them untold riches if they could meet his impossible demands. Many came, many tried, but all failed until one blustery autumn day when an unassuming young architect named Vidura arrived. He stood before the king, not with grandiose plans, but with a simple sketch of a gate made not of stone or wood, but of light itself. Intrigued, the king offered him a chance. If he could build this ethereal entrance, Vidura would have his reward. So began the most ambitious construction project the world had ever seen. Under Vidura's direction, thousands of artisans toiled for years. They chiseled steps from solid rock, each tread echoing the next like a stairway to the heavens. They wove intricate patterns into stained glass windows, capturing the very essence of the sky. And at the gate's heart, they crafted a massive lens out of polished crystal, capable of bending sunlight itself. When the gate was finished, it was more magnificent than even the king had imagined. Its design perfectly captured the essence of light and shadow, creating a breathtaking spectacle throughout the day. In the morning, golden rays streamed through the crystal, painting the courtyard in hues of amber and rose. At midday, playful shafts of light danced on the glass windows, transforming the gate into a kaleidoscope of color. And as twilight approached, the crystal captured the last rays of the setting sun, bathing everything in shades of purple and crimson. Every hour, every season, every weather condition, the Gate of Light displayed a different facet of its design, never repeating itself, always surprising. For over 2,000 years, it stood as the world's greatest wonder, drawing awestruck visitors from across the known world. Travelers marveled at its beauty, poets sang of its splendor, and kings boasted of their pilgrimage to its hallowed entrance. But all good things must come to an end. As centuries turned into millennia, the once proud kingdom of Gandhara fell into decline. The mighty Gate of Light, neglected and forgotten, crumbled into disrepair. The grand crystal cracked and faded, the vibrant colors leached away, and the crowds of visitors dwindled to a trickle. No longer did the gate capture the essence of light and shadow. Instead, it became a mere shell of its former self, its magnificence lost to the sands of time. And so the tale of the Gate of Light was consigned to legend, remembered only in faded manuscripts and whispered folktales. Until one day, a young woman named Kamala stumbled upon an ancient text that spoke of its splendor. Intrigued, she set out on a journey to find it, following the faded ink and cryptic clues until she reached a crumbling watchtower overlooking a dried-up riverbed. There, half buried in the sand, she discovered a tarnished copper plate bearing an inscription that read, "Where the first rays of dawn touch the last stones of memory." Though the Gate of Light had been lost for centuries, its spirit lived on in the hearts of a few. A band of wandering musicians kept its memory alive with haunting melodies that spoke of its grandeur. An old woman living deep in the mountains claimed to have seen its ethereal glow in a dream. And in the bustling city of Balkh, a cobbler's daughter wove tales of its magic into her tapestries, hoping to inspire awe in her customers. Kamala sought out these keepers of the flame, piecing together fragments of the gate's location from their stories. The musician spoke of a nearby oasis where one could rest by a pool reflecting the morning sun. The old woman recalled a narrow gorge where mountain winds whispered secrets of the past. And in Balkh, the cobbler's daughter pointed to a hill with a crown of crumbling towers, saying, "When I ascend to the top, I can almost hear the echoes of its beauty." Guided by these cryptic clues, Kamala finally reached the forgotten gate. Hidden away, choked by weeds and shrouded in mystery, it was nothing like the grand entrance described in the ancient texts. The crystal was shattered, the paint was peeling, and the vibrant colors had faded to dull hues. Yet something about its broken arches and weathered stones stirred a deep longing in Kamala's soul. Determined to restore the gate to its former glory, she rallied the townspeople to her cause. Together, they cleared the rubble, repaired the structure, and set about recreating the gate's intricate design. The musicians wove new melodies inspired by the gate's rebirth. The old woman shared vivid memories of its colors, and the cobbler's daughter used her tapestries to recreate the stained glass patterns. As the work progressed, the gate slowly began to glow with renewed life. The townspeople marveled at each recovered fragment, each restored archway, each recreated window. Their efforts breathed new life into the ancient structure, bringing it back from the brink of oblivion. Finally, the day arrived when the Gate of Light stood fully restored before them. No longer was it a faded ruin. It was a testament to the power of collective memory, a beacon of hope in a forgotten corner of the world. Yet something was still missing. The crystal heart of the gate, the very essence of its design, remained shattered and unrepaired. Without it, the gate was just a beautiful but ordinary entrance. Kamala knew that to complete their task, they needed a miracle. As if by magic, a renowned scholar appeared, bearing an ancient scroll that detailed how to create a new crystal lens, one that could capture the essence of light and shadow once more. Guided by the scroll's cryptic instruction, Kamala and the townspeople ventured into the mountains to gather special minerals, rare herbs, and celestial quartz. They ground the minerals into shimmering powders, infused the quartz with herbal essence, and combined them in a precise pattern under the guidance of the full moon. The result was a crystal so pure and radiant it seemed to hum with inner light. With their new crystal in hand, they returned to the gate and installed it at its heart. Immediately, the gate blazed with renewed life. Sunlight streamed through the crystal, painting the courtyard in ever-changing hues. In the morning, the crystal sparkled like 1,000 diamonds. At noon, it glowed with the warmth of 1,000 suns. And at sunset, it shimmered with the colors of 1,000 rainbows. Once again, the Gate of Light was a wonder of the world. People came from far and wide to witness its beauty, to experience the magic that unfolded before their eyes every hour of every day. And Kamala, the young woman who had dared to dream of its restoration, became known throughout the land as the gatekeeper, ensuring that its light shone brightly for generations to come. So too may our love for our craft ensure that the light of our work shines brightly, illuminate. Yes, there were arches. Yes, there were columns. There were even carved lions on either side, their teeth chipped with painstaking precision. But the wide mouths of the gates remained empty, like grinning faces without lips. The king, of course, declared this a stroke of genius, insisting that invisible doors were the fashion of the future. It was time for another royal commission. And so the king summoned the architect, his mind already teeming with grand ideas for his next project. He wanted a palace, he said. One that would put Gandhara on the map, something that would attract merchants from distant lands. And so the architect was set to work. He walked around the city, taking measurements, studying the angles of the sun at different times of the day, watching how people went about their daily lives. Gandhara was a bustling city, but it lacked grandeur, he thought. It needed vertical structures, obelisks that pierced the sky, pointing the way to the heavens. Towers that challenged the clouds, showing the world Gandhara's might. The king would love it, he thought. When he presented his plan to the king, the latter's eyes lit up. The king loved heights. The grand towers would be an architectural marvel, he declared, and he ordered them to be built at once. But when they were finished, the king wasn't satisfied. They looked good, he said, but they were too well visible. Couldn't they be made invisible? The architect was taken aback. He had never heard such a thing. But the king insisted, so he took up the challenge. It took months to solve the problem. The architect worked tirelessly, experimenting with different materials, trying to come up with a solution. Finally, he hit upon a seemingly simple idea. He mixed sawdust and water into a thick paste and coated the towers with it. The result was almost magical. From a distance, the towers looked like they were made of wood, like giant tree trunks reaching up to the sky. As the years passed, they blended seamlessly with the lush green canopy, becoming one with the trees. The king was ecstatic. His towers were now invisible, hidden in plain sight. He declared it a masterpiece, a triumph of Gandharan engineering. He wasn't wrong. The architect's genius was indeed a triumph, but not for the reasons he thought. Because what he had created were not towers, not in the conventional sense anyway. What he had built were giant birds' nests. And these weren't just any bird's nests. They were majestically huge, easily big enough to house hundreds of eggs. But who would build such enormous nests? The king asked, scratching his head. The architect didn't know, and in truth, nobody did. The first settlers of Gandhara had been a primitive tribe of people who lived in caves and hunted animals for food. Over time, some of them started to build rudimentary huts out of wood and mud, and eventually they learned to make proper houses out of brick and stone. But the transition from caves to huts to houses had taken centuries. In just a few generations, they had gone from living in caves to building palaces. How could they have forgotten what had come so naturally to them? And yet they had. The skills of the stonemasons had atrophied. Nobody knew how to lay bricks anymore. Carpenters had become blacksmiths and potters. The tribe had progressed, or so they thought, until the king came along and reignited their long dormant instincts. Now that he thought about it, it was quite remarkable, the architect mused. A single individual had managed to reawaken an entire civilization. And yet the king wasn't satisfied. The towers were magnificent, he said, but they were too, natural. Couldn't they be made invisible? The architect was baffled. The king wanted to hide his most prized possession, the very symbol of his greatness, from sight. But the king was adamant, so the architect set to work once more. He coated the nest with a thick layer of plaster, then painted over it with whitewash. The effect was stunning. The giant nest looked like smooth, featureless walls, blending seamlessly with the whitewashed houses of the city. Gandhara had changed so much, the architect thought, that his people no longer knew what to make of him. They were too busy gawking at the new wonders of their king. Gandhara was indeed on the map now. Merchants from distant lands came from all over to see the wondrous city, only to find themselves utterly bewildered by what they saw. The city was beautiful, yes, but it was missing something. Its streets were lined with tall, whitewashed walls, but there was nothing behind them. Its houses were elegant and spacious, but they were empty, and there was no sign of life anywhere. Where were the people, the merchants wondered. They asked the locals, but nobody knew. All they heard were hushed whispers of a great plague that had struck the city down. The merchants, of course, knew this wasn't true. The people of Gandhara hadn't fallen victim to a plague. They had vanished purposely and completely. Their houses, their shops, their workshops, everything they owned was left exactly where they had last used it, as if they had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. The merchants were fascinated by this ghost town, but they couldn't stay here forever. So they packed up their things and moved on. And as they walked away from Gandhara, they noticed something peculiar. On the outskirts of the city, far from the prying eyes of visitors, the people had returned. They were farming the land, raising cattle, living their lives. They hadn't been hiding from the merchants, they realized. They were hiding from the king. And now they knew why. For as they walked through the city, they had noticed something else. Something that made their blood run cold. All around the city, on every wall, every pillar, every window, were strange symbols of the tribe that had once inhabited these lands. Symbols that had been passed down from mother to daughter, from father to son for thousands of years. Symbols of a religion that the king had outlawed. A religion that forbade its followers from living in cities, from owning property, from accumulating wealth. The merchants understood now why the people had abandoned their homes, why they had turned their backs on the king's wonders. They had chosen poverty over riches, homelessness over shelter, hunger over food. They had chosen freedom. The merchants reached the safety of the forest, and there they stayed, watching Gandhara from afar. They watched the king pace back and forth on his white marble balcony, watched his ministers scramble around like ants, watched the priests perform their rituals in the temple. But they never saw the people, never saw them until the day they decided to return. The merchants were shocked. The people had returned to their old ways, they realized, but not before making one last stand against the king. They had burned down their houses, poisoned the wells, killed the cattle, destroyed everything the king had given them before they left. Gandhara, it seemed, was destined to remain a ghost town. The merchants cheered, but their joy was short-lived. Years have passed since our last visit to the forgotten gates of Gandhara. You've probably already seen that video. If not, it's somewhere around here. The locals have had enough time to find other things to do now, and we are here to explore those new activities. As we approach the main gate, we see a large group of armed men standing perfectly still in the center of the archway, blocking the path forward. They seem to be dressed in old, worn-out military uniforms. This must be some kind of military outpost. But who are these men? What are they waiting for? And what exactly are they waiting for? Well, let's find out. Behind me is the second most famous archaeological site in this country. It's one of the largest and most well-preserved ancient city walls in all of South Asia. It was built about 2,300 years ago by an emperor named Ashoka. At its largest, it enclosed an area over 4 square kilometers, boasting 7 magnificent gates. The remains of this ancient structure can still be found throughout the modern city of Sikri, which is located in the northwest of the country. Unlike last time, where we pretended to be Buddhist monks hiding from angry villagers, today we will be visiting as honored guests. See, these guys aren't soldiers at all. They are actors. This is a tourist attraction, and these men are performing a skit from the time of the ancient Kushan Empire. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go and wash my hands. That was terrible. Anyway, their performance is actually really impressive, but only because they don't do anything. Basically, every day they were ordered to stand in the archways and pretend to be doors. When a farmer with goats arrived, a soldier would raise his spear, block the path, and solemnly declare, "Please wait. The door is opening." Then after a dramatic pause, he would step aside and gesture, as though swinging an imaginary panel. Meanwhile, 2 men in the back row surreptitiously eye each other's spears and plan their escape. They've been stuck in this stupid little town for months now and are tired of eating goat testicles. Oh, sorry. I mean, goat testicles. No, I really meant goat testicles. Okay, so they decide to run away. One of them, the skinny guy with a scraggly beard, looks like he could use a few more goat testicles. Anyway, he starts making his way slowly towards the end of the line. Just as he thinks he's gonna get away with it, the leader turns around, catches him trying to skip the line, and yells, "Hey, why are you skipping the line? This isn't a Western fast food restaurant. Everyone has to wait their turn, even if it takes all day. Hurry up and get to the back of the line. We're about to put on another show for those damn tourists." Wait, no, sorry. You want to switch places with me? I gotta take a dump. Okay, great. Thanks. They perform this little skit several times a day for tips. And honestly, it's pretty entertaining. But I think it's time we move on to something a bit more exciting. I hear there's a giant reclining Buddha statue nearby that's covered in mola mala. Mola mala, what's that? Mola mala is a religious sculpture found in various parts of the Himalayas, typically adorning the exterior of stupas, monasteries, and temples. This fascinating tradition dates back to the 9th century when Buddhism was brought to the region by Tibetan monks. The term mola mola itself means garland or adoration in the native language. It consists of small clay or stone figures meticulously crafted to resemble various sacred beings from Buddhist mythology. These figures are then attached to the surface of religious structures in a seemingly random fashion, creating an eclectic and somewhat chaotic display. Some of the most common figures depicted in the murals include monks, animals such as dogs, horses, and birds, as well as esoteric symbols and deities. The inclusion of mundane elements like dogs serves multiple purposes. Firstly, it's believed that dogs played a significant role in the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha. They were known to follow him during his teachings and were considered his loyal companions. By incorporating dogs into the mola mala, the faithful expressed their devotion to the teachings of the Buddha. Additionally, including these ordinary creatures in religious art helps make the figures more relatable and accessible to the general public. The seemingly haphazard arrangement of the figures is not without purpose. Rather than following a fixed design, the placement of the mola mola is often determined through divination practices, dreams, or the guidance of religious leaders. This approach imbues each mola mola with a unique character and allows for a personal connection between the observer and the figures. In recent decades, the popularity of mola mola has waned somewhat due to changing religious practices and modernization. However, the tradition continues to persist in certain regions of Ladakh and Nepal, serving as a tangible link to the rich cultural heritage of the Himalayas. I think this is a really interesting piece of religious art, and I encourage anyone who can to come see it for themselves. That was absolutely wonderful, except for the fact that there isn't actually a giant reclining Buddha statue covered in mola mola. I made that part up. It sounded cool and I thought you might enjoy the word mola mola. I'm sorry. There's nothing to see here. Just a boring old temple. How embarrassing. Well, anyway, while we didn't find any giant Buddhas or mysterious statues, we did discover something quite remarkable just outside the city limits. We found an entire ancient city. Oh, okay, not really an entire city, more like a few scattered ruins. But hey, we'll take what we can get. This place is called Takht-e-Bahu, and it was once an important religious center. The name translates to Seat of the Lion, which refers to a local legend about the birth of the Buddha. According to this tale, the Buddha was born under a tree near this very spot, and a lioness is said to have been present at his birth. Although the historical accuracy of this story is debatable, it's clear that the ancient people who lived here held great reverence for lions. A depiction of a roaring lion can be found carved into the entrance to these ruins, hinting at the site's significance in Buddhist lore. Unfortunately, much of the history of this place is shrouded in mystery, as many of the texts that may have shed light on its importance have yet to be discovered. It's possible that future excavations may reveal more about Takht-e-Bahu's past, but until then, we can only speculate about its origins and purpose. What we do know is that this place served as a major pilgrimage site, attracting devout Buddhists from across the region. Thousands of years ago, travelers would journey to Takht-e-Bahu to pay homage to the Buddha and seek enlightenment. Imagine the long walks along dusty paths, the sound of chanting echoing through the trees, and the sight of pilgrims dressed in saffron robes. The atmosphere must have been electric with anticipation and devotion. Today, the ruins of Takht-e-Bahu are a shadow of their former selves. Only a handful of weathered stones and crumbling walls remain to mark the site of ancient Buddhist center. Yet somehow these fragments evoke a powerful sense of nostalgia for a time when Buddhism flourished here. Walking among the ruins, we can almost feel the presence of the countless pilgrims who came before us, their hopes and dreams echoing through the ages. The air was thick with anticipation. All eyes were on the massive stone doors, the last remnants of the ancient kingdom of Gandhara, which for over 1,500 years had stood silently watching over the bustling city of Peshawar in Pakistan. It was me. 5 years had passed since my first visit to this magical place. Time enough for a legend to grow, but not enough for the gates to be any less imposing. For centuries, these colossal sentinels had guarded the entrance to the city, silently bearing witness to the rise and fall of empires. Now, after more than a millennium of slumber, they were stirring once again. Not exactly as per the original plan, though. Back in 2018, when I first discovered them, there was no crowd gathered here. No tourists, no vendors, just me and the crumbling remains of Alexander the Great's ancient city. Back then, these gates were more of a secret, known only to a few locals. But now, news had spread and people from all over the country and even beyond were coming to pay their respects. It was both exciting and nerve-wracking to see so many people come out to explore this historical site. Would they respect the gates? Or would they treat them like some kind of tourist trap? It was hard to say. The initial response, however, gave me hope. The travelers were confused, but they complied. Some would even bow to the invisible hinges, muttering thanks for being allowed entry. That was promising. But then the goats showed up. Goats had been getting through these gates long before we even knew they existed. They seem to know something that humans have forgotten. That sometimes the best way to get what you want is to simply walk through it. And these agile mountain goats didn't need permission from anyone. They leaped through the soldiers' legs, sending them sprawling to the ground, bleating loudly for all to hear. It was hilarious, but also a bit infuriating. Just because they could jump through the gate didn't mean they should. What kind of message did that send? That might have been fine if this was just a local legend, but now that people from all over the country were making the pilgrimage to see the gates, it was important that they were respected. This was no ordinary monument. These were the gates of Gandhara, one of the oldest cities in human history. They had been built in the 4th century BCE by the Indo-Greek king Menander, who ruled over the region during the height of the Silk Road trade. At that time, Gandhara was a melting pot of cultures, a place where the East met the West and ideas flowed like water. According to legend, the city was so prosperous that merchants from China could sell silk in Greece, and spices from India could be bought in Rome. The gates, which were decorated with intricate carvings of mythical creatures and scenes from ancient battles, symbolized the grandeur of the city and the power of its king. Yet despite their importance, the gates were lost to history for more than 1,000 years until they were rediscovered by chance in 1937. Now they stood as a reminder of a time when Gandhara was one of the most important cities in the world. And yet here they were, defaced by goats and ignored by everyone else. I couldn't bear it any longer. It was time to take action. I walked up to the nearest goat, a stubborn-looking beast with horns like scimitars, and tried to shoo it away. It stared at me for a moment, then let out a loud bleat and jumped back through the gates. Frustrated, I turned to the crowd and asked if anyone had an idea what to do. A young man with a thoughtful expression stepped forward. He suggested building a small fence around the gates, just enough to keep the goats out while still allowing people to pass through. It was a simple solution, but it took a lot of work. Luckily, a team of volunteers was already on the case. With the help of the local community, they set to work, hammering together wooden stakes and ropes, determined to protect the gates from further damage. Meanwhile, the goats watched from a distance, bleating their disapproval. Yet despite their grumbling, no one tried to break through the fence. Perhaps they understood that their carefree days of running through the gates were over. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city walls, the fence was finished. It wasn't much to look at, but it did the job. As I stood there admiring the work, I thought about how far we'd come since my first visit to the gates 5 years ago. Back then, no one even knew about the project. Now we had built something that would hopefully preserve these ancient wonders for generations to come. Of course, the goats weren't happy about it. One particularly grumpy fellow tried to kick the fence, but it didn't budge. He let out a frustrated bleat and jumped back through the open gate, disappearing into the darkness. Suddenly, a loud cheer went up from the crowd. Someone had climbed to the top of the gate and was waving to the others. I looked up and saw a group of young men struggling to pull their friend down. Apparently, he'd gotten stuck. I rushed over to help, but by the time we got him down, his phone was dead. It was a good thing we hadn't waited any longer. As we stood there catching our breath, I realized that we had a bigger problem on our hands. These gates were meant to be preserved, not turned into some kind of adventure park. But now that word had gotten out, who knew what would happen next? Maybe we should build a proper fence, one that would keep everyone out. Then again, how would that be fair to the people who had come to see the gates? The truth was, I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that things couldn't continue like this. We needed to find a way to protect the gates without keeping people away from them. As the night wore on, the crowd slowly began to disperse. Soon there was no one left but us and the goats. We stood in silence, contemplating the mystery of the gates. Then suddenly one of the goats let out a loud bleat and ran towards the opening. The rest followed, disappearing into the darkness. I watched them go, feeling a sense of foreboding. What if they were right? What if we had done something we shouldn't have? Hadn't we taken something away from these gates by trying to preserve them? The answer, I knew, lay somewhere in the ancient city, hidden among the ruins of the past. It was time to go exploring. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had a feeling that the answer would reveal itself in time. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silvery light over the city, I ventured deeper into Gandhara. The streets were deserted. The only sound the wind whistling through the crumbling buildings. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a sacred space. The further I walked, the more overgrown the path became. Vines and weeds closed in around me, making it hard to see. Then suddenly the trees parted and I found myself in a clearing. In front of me was a vast expanse of land dotted with the ruins of old buildings. And in the center, standing like a silent sentinel, was a single tree. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its branches were gnarled and twisted, reaching up to the sky like the arms of a giant. As I approached the tree, I noticed strange symbols carved into its trunk. They looked like ancient runes. Once upon a time, in a magnificent city far, far away, there lived a powerful and benevolent king. He ruled his kingdom with wisdom and fairness, and his people loved him dearly. The city was renowned for its beauty and grandeur, with towering palaces and majestic temples adorning its landscape. But what truly set it apart were its enormous iron gates, intricately crafted with celestial patterns that seemed to dance before one's eyes. These gates were not just a means of entry, they were a testament to the city's prosperity and cultural richness. Every morning, when the sun peeked over the horizon, its golden rays would filter through the celestial patterns of the gates, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that painted the city in awe. The townspeople marveled at this spectacle, their hearts swelling with pride and gratitude for their king who had commissioned these masterpieces. However, as time marched on, the memory of the gates began to fade from the minds of the townspeople. They became so accustomed to the daily display of colors that it no longer held the same wonder as before. It was just a part of their routine, like the rising and setting of the sun. One day, a wise traveler visited the city. He had heard tales of the magnificent gates, and his curiosity was piqued to witness this wonder for himself. As he approached the city, he noticed the intricate designs adorning the gates. The celestial patterns seemed to shimmer and glow as if they were alive. But what truly captivated him was the play of colors that bathed the city in hues of gold and crimson every morning. The traveler stood mesmerized, realizing that he was witnessing more than just a spectacle. It was a symbol of the city's heritage, a reminder of its glorious past. He decided to speak with the king, to delve deeper into the story behind these magnificent gates. So he entered the palace and found the king in his royal court. The king was adorned in fine garments, and his presence radiated power and wisdom. The traveler introduced himself and explained his admiration for the gates and his desire to learn more about them. The king listened attentively, his face betraying no emotion. When the traveler finished, the king nodded slowly. He understood the importance of preserving one's history and culture. "You're right," the king said, his voice echoing with authority. "These gates are more than just a spectacle. They are a symbol of our city's heritage. It is our duty to ensure that they are protected and cherished for generations to come." The king turned to his court, his eyes scanning the assembled dignitaries and scholars. "I want each one of you to contribute to the preservation of our gates. Historians will record their magnificence, artists will immortalize their grandeur in paintings and sculptures, and poets will sing their praises in songs and epics." But while all this was going on, an old man sat quietly in the corner of the court, listening intently to the king's words. But he was a former court architect who had served the king's predecessors. In his time, he had designed and built many magnificent structures, but his greatest achievement was the celestial gates. He remembered the long hours he had spent meticulously planning and crafting the design, pouring his heart and soul into every twist and turn of the metal. He could still recall the king's delighted expression when he first unveiled his creation. The way the monarch had walked through the gates slowly, taking in the sight and sound of the clanking chains and the play of light and shadow. The old man had beamed with pride, knowing that he had created something truly special. But as the years passed and new rulers took the throne, the memory of the gates faded from the court's attention. He had watched new architects and designers take center stage, their creations overshadowing his own. And now here he was, an old, forgotten man, listening to the king reiterate the need to preserve the very gates he had designed and built. The old man felt a surge of emotions, a mix of pride, nostalgia, and bitterness. He wanted to stand up, to call out to the king and remind him of his contribution. But he was too shy, too afraid to break the silence after all these years. What would the king think? Would he even remember? The old man hesitated, his past glory fading into the background as the king continued speaking. When the king finished his address, the court erupted in cheers. Historians, artists, and poets pledged their support, eager to contribute to the preservation of the city's heritage. But the old man remained seated, his thoughts a jumble of emotions. Should he reveal himself? The question echoed in his mind, but fear held him back. Suddenly, a commotion broke out near the entrance. A group of soldiers stood guard, barring the way for a newcomer. The old man turned to see who had dared to interrupt the court proceedings. His eyes widened in surprise. Standing before the king was a young woman, her head held high, her gaze unwavering. She was dressed in simple clothes, yet there was a regal bearing about her that demanded attention. The soldiers hesitated, unsure of what to do. The old man leaned forward, intrigued by the young woman's presence. "Who are you?" the king demanded, his voice echoing with authority. The woman took a step forward, her voice ringing with confidence. "My name is Calvi, and I am the daughter of the last queen of this kingdom." The court gasped. No one had known the king had a daughter, let alone that she was alive. Carvey continued, "I have returned to claim my birthright and protect the legacy of our kingdom." The old man's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the chance he had been waiting for? Or would Carvey understand his pain and give him the recognition he deserved? As Carvey continued speaking, the old man's hope grew. Perhaps she would help him reclaim his lost glory. Maybe she would appreciate the intricate design and hard work he had poured into the gates all those years ago. The old man yearned for recognition, for someone to acknowledge his contribution and remind the king of his former greatness. He looked at Corby, her head held high, her voice echoing through the court, and felt a surge of optimism. Could this be the opportunity he had been waiting for? Would Corby become the champion he needed to remind the king of his glorious past and the magnificent gates he had built? The old man held his breath, eager to see how the young princess would navigate the court and fulfill her destiny. The king rose from his throne, his face etched with determination. "You have spoken well, Carvey, and your words have stirred my heart. You may have a point, but why should I hide my gates with mere wood? Stone deserves to be seen, not covered." With that, the king strode towards the entrance, followed by his daughter and the curious court. The old man watched, his hopes dwindling. Had his moment passed? Would the gates remain hidden forever? The king stopped before the gates, his eyes scanning the intricate designs. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. He reached out, tracing the celestial patterns, and a flicker of recognition appeared in his eyes. The old man's heart sank. Was this the end of his story? Would the gates continue to be shrouded in mystery, their true origins forgotten? Suddenly the king straightened, his eyes gleaming with newfound determination. He turned to the assembled court, his voice echoing with authority. "I have made a decision," he declared. "We will restore the gates to their former glory and reveal their magnificence to all who enter the city." The court erupted in cheers, celebrating the king's decision. The old man's spirits lifted, a glimmer of hope rekindled within him. Could this be his moment? Would he finally get the chance to reveal his creation and receive the recognition he deserved? As the crowd dispersed, the king approached the old man. Merchants traveling from faraway lands to see the wonders of this new world would hear tales of these massive gates that opened and closed by themselves, and curiosity got the better of them. They would then make it a point to stop by and see this wonder for themselves. Some would stand outside the gates for hours, timing how long the door ceremony took. It was quite a profitable business for Gandhara, since travelers had to pay a fee for the right to enter and exit the city. So while the gates did not open and close anything, they did collect money. Sometimes it would take an entire day for the gates to open and close, and sometimes it would happen in a matter of minutes. But one thing was certain, it was never predictable. There was even a tavern built into the gates where weary travelers could rest their heads while waiting for the doors to open. The tavern was always bustling with activity, as one could never tell how long they would be stuck waiting for the gates to move. So drinking and gambling was a popular pastime for those stuck waiting. Many travelers would become regular customers of the tavern simply because they were never sure when they would pass through Gandhara again and find themselves stuck waiting outside the gates once more. Now, some merchants were not willing to wait around for days on end just to get into the city. And so they paid the guards stationed at the gate to let them through. Naturally, the merchants did not have enough money to bribe all of the guards, but they were able to slip past much faster if they offered the guard enough money. Of course, this practice did not go unnoticed, and soon Gandhara found itself with an additional source of income. Bribery was rampant at the gates. Merchants were so eager to get into the city that they were willing to pay exorbitant amounts of money to the guards just to be let in. The city of Gandhara did not want to miss out on this opportunity to make money. So instead of punishing the guards for accepting bribes, they encouraged it. Eventually, there was such a high demand for getting through the gates that Gandhara set up a special office just for facilitating bribes. Travelers now had the option of paying a small fee to get through the gates quickly, or paying a hefty bribe to get through in a matter of seconds. Of course, many merchants still chose to wait outside the gates, not wanting to give the city any more of their money than absolutely necessary. They would often form betting pools, trying to guess how long it would take for the gates to open. And the odds were always in their favor. The gates rarely took less than an hour to open and close, and sometimes it took days. But this uncertainty was part of the fun for many travelers. It was a game of chance, and they were happy to play along as they didn't have to wait too long. But when the gates did open and close, it was a sight to behold. People would run to the gates, excited to witness the spectacle for themselves. The opening and closing of the gates was a major event for Gandhara. People would cheer and celebrate when the gates finally moved, and the city would come alive with excitement. This wasn't because the gates controlled access to the city. After all, there were other ways in and out of Gandhara. No, the people of Gandhara were celebrating the fact that the gates had finally opened and they could resume their normal lives. For many people in Gandhara, life revolved around the gates. Their jobs, their families, and their social lives were all affected by the opening and closing of the gates. When the gates were closed, people had to stay in the city and couldn't leave. This meant that people couldn't travel to other cities to do business or visit family and friends. It also meant that people couldn't go to the fields to work or collect food. As a result, people in Gandhara had to rely on the food and resources within the city limits, which often led to shortages. When the gates were open, people could move freely in and out of the city. This meant that people could travel to other cities to do business or visit family and friends. It also meant that people could go to the fields to work or collect food. As a result, people in Gandhara had access to the resources they needed to survive. Many people in Gandhara kept meticulous records of the gates' movements. They would note the date and time that the gates opened and closed so that they could plan their lives accordingly. For example, if the gates were likely to be closed for an extended period of time, people in Gandhara would stock up on food and supplies so that they would be prepared. Conversely, if the gates were likely to be open for an extended period of time, people in Gandhara would take advantage of the opportunity to travel and trade. It was not uncommon for people in Gandhara to plan their entire year around the gates' schedule. The opening and closing of the gates had a profound impact on the people of Gandhara. The gates were not just a way to control access to the city, they were a way of life. People in Gandhara had to constantly be aware of the gates' movements and plan their lives accordingly. The gates were a constant source of anxiety for the people of Gandhara. The opening and closing of the gates was often unpredictable, and people never knew when they would be trapped inside or outside the city. This unpredictability made it difficult for people to plan ahead and added a sense of urgency to everyday life. The gates were a reminder of the city's power over its people. The people of Gandhara were at the mercy of the city's leaders and had no control over when the gates would open or close. This lack of control was a constant source of frustration for the people of Gandhara and often led to resentment towards the city's leadership. Despite the challenges they presented, the gates of Gandhara were an integral part of the city. They were a defining feature of Gandhara and played a major role in the city's identity. The gates were a symbol of Gandhara's power and wealth and were a source of pride for the people of Gandhara. People in Gandhara were fiercely protective of their gates and would defend them with their lives if necessary. But as time went on, the gates fell into disrepair. The mechanisms that had once opened and closed them smoothly became rusty and worn down. The gates became more and more difficult to move, and eventually they just stopped moving altogether. The gates of Gandhara, once a symbol of the city's power and wealth, became a relic of the past. But despite their dilapidated state, the gates remained an integral part of Gandhara. They were a defining feature of the city and a source of nostalgia for the people of Gandhara. As the centuries passed, the people of Gandhara grew old and died, but their stories lived on. The stories of the gates of Gandhara were passed down from generation to generation, and the gates became a part of local folklore. Today, the gates of Gandhara are nothing but a faint memory. The city has long since been forgotten, and the gates are just a pile of rust and dust. But the legend of the gates lives on. People still tell stories of the gates of Gandhara and the strange and mysterious ways in which they moved. And so the legacy of the gates of Gandhara lives on, a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of an ancient civilization. And that is why, dear viewers, we must preserve our history and learn from the civilizations that came before us. Who knows what wonders we might discover if we do. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe for more content. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you know about any other historical places like the gates of Gandhara? Share your knowledge with us and other viewers. The Forgotten Gates of Gandhara. The air hung heavy with humidity as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A lone figure stood silhouetted against the dying light, his weathered face etched with determination. This was Gandhara, the last of the gatekeepers, and he was preparing for his nightly ritual. Every evening, just as the sun surrendered to the moon, Gandhara would perform an ancient ceremony at the gates of his forgotten city. It was a ritual designed to honor the past and keep the memories of Gandhara's lost civilization alive. Each gate represented a portal to another time, a gateway to the city's glorious history, and Gandhara, the last remaining gatekeeper, was its sole guardian. The story began where the first part left off, with Gandhara, a man on a mission to uncover the mysteries of his past. His journey led him back to his ancestral home, the long-lost city of Gandhara, where he discovered a series of massive gates, each intricately carved with tales of bygone eras. These gates, once symbols of a thriving metropolis, now stood as silent sentinels guarding secrets from a forgotten time. Upon his return, Gandhara learned that he was not only the last descendant of the royal bloodline, but also the final gatekeeper, tasked with the responsibility of keeping these ancient portals active. It was a duty passed down through generations, ensuring that the spirits of Gandhara's past could find peace and that the city's history would not be lost to time. As the centuries rolled by, the world around Gandhara changed drastically. The once bustling city fell into ruin, swallowed by the relentless march of progress. But amidst the decay and neglect, the gates of Gandhara remained, silently bearing witness to the ebb and flow of time. But why were these gates so important? What purpose did they serve that made them so crucial to Gandhara's legacy? The answer lay hidden in the intricate carvings adorning each gate. They depicted scenes from the city's rich history, moments of triumph, love, loss, and renewal. Each carving was a story, each story a piece of Gandhara's soul. It was Gandhara's duty to ensure that these stories didn't fade into oblivion. Every evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, he would come to the gates, each representing a different era of Gandhara's past. He would light incense, pour water, make offerings to the spirits residing within the gates. In doing so, he kept the portals open, allowing the spirits to pass through and be reunited with their loved ones. For the people of Gandhara, the gates were more than just historical relics. They were pathways to the afterlife. Gateways that allowed the spirits of their ancestors to find rest. Without Gandhara's nightly rituals, the gates would become dormant, the spirits trapped forever. On average, the soldiers performed this imaginary ritual 37 times a day per gate. With 20 gates surrounding the main city, that amounted to 740 openings every single day. It was exhausting work, though the king praised it as the greatest theater ever performed. But Gandhara wasn't just a dutiful gatekeeper. He was also a historian, an archaeologist, and perhaps most importantly, a storyteller. As he performed his nightly rituals, he would speak. He would narrate the scenes carved into the gates, bringing the past to life for anyone who would listen. His voice echoed across the ruins, carrying tales of bravery, love, loss, and hope to anyone who stumbled upon this forgotten city. Some dismissed him as a madman, talking to ghosts in the twilight. Others, entranced by his tales, would sit at his feet soaking in the stories of a bygone era. Among them was a young woman named Selena, a researcher who had come to Gandhara in search of her own roots. She had heard rumors of a gatekeeper who kept the city's history alive, and she had come to see for herself. As she listened to Gandhara's stories, she felt a deep connection to the past, a sense of belonging that she had never known. Selena realized that Gandhara's work was more than just a duty. It was a testament to the human spirit, a celebration of life, and an act of defiance against the relentless march of time. She decided to help him, to assist in the preservation of Gandhara's legacy. Together, Gandhara and Selena worked tirelessly to keep the city's history alive. They welcomed anyone who showed genuine interest in Gandhara's tales, sharing the wisdom and knowledge passed down through the ages. Their efforts bore fruit. Soon, a small community formed around the gates of Gandhara. People from all walks of life came to the forgotten city, drawn by the promise of adventure and discovery. They helped restore the gates, each becoming a silent partner in Gandhara's mission. The once desolate city came back to life. not with the hustle and bustle of his former glory, but with the quiet hum of reverence and respect. However, not everyone was happy about this revival. There was Amar, a greedy businessman who saw Gandhara's efforts as a threat to his plans for the city. Amar wanted to turn the ruins into a tourist trap, exploiting the city's history for personal gain. He tried to buy Gandhara out, offering him riches beyond his wildest dreams. But Gandhara refused, his determination unwavering. He knew that the city's history was too precious to be tarnished for profit. Amar, enraged by Gandhara's refusal, resorted to threats, sending thugs to intimidate the gatekeeper and his followers. But Gandhara was not one to back down. He stood firm, his voice ringing with the strength of conviction. He rallied his followers, reminding them of the importance of their cause. Together, they faced down Amar's threats, their unity and purpose making them a formidable force. In the end, Amar's greed proved his undoing. The people of Gandhara, united under Gandhara's leadership, exposed his nefarious plans, turning the townspeople against him. Amar, once the embodiment of unchecked ambition, found himself alone and defeated, his dreams of exploiting Gandhara's legacy shattered. With their greatest challenge overcome, Gandhara and his followers continued their work, their resolve only strengthened by their shared struggle. The gates of Gandhara continued to stand, silent witnesses to the drama that unfolded beneath them. They echoed with the laughter of children, the murmur of tourists, and the steady rhythm of Gandhara's narration. Years turned into decades, yet Gandhara's spirit remained unbroken. His dedication to his craft became a beacon of inspiration, attracting those who valued history, culture, and the human spirit. One day, a young man approached Gandhara. He introduced himself as Kiran, a filmmaker documenting the world's forgotten cultures. He had come to Gandhara to learn more about the city's history and the man who kept his legacy alive. Intrigued by Gandhara's story, Kiran decided to make a documentary about him and the gates of Gandhara. He set up cameras around the city, capturing Gandhara's rituals and Selena's research, as well as the everyday life of the small community that had grown around the gates. As Kiran worked, he got to know Gandhara and Selena better, learning about their hopes, dreams, and fears for the future of Gandhara. He saw how their passion for the city's history had brought them together and how their dedication had breathed new life into the ruins. Kiran's documentary was a critical success. It showcased the beauty of Gandhara's rituals, the mystery of the gates, and the tireless work of Gandhara and his followers. It also explored the threat posed by Amar and the importance of preserving cultural heritage. The documentary aired to a worldwide audience, introducing millions to the forgotten city of Gandhara. People from all over the world started visiting the gates, eager to experience the magic that Kiran had captured on camera. But with the increased attention came new challenges. All those who have not yet heard the tale of Gyandev and the gates of Gandhara, I will sum it up briefly. Long ago in the foothills of the Himalayas, there lived a king named Gyandev. Now, one day while strolling through his city, he came across an old weathered gate that was so overgrown with weeds that its hinges were completely rust. With a sigh, the king made a wish that if only he had such a strong and sturdy gate to guard the city, none of his enemies could have breached Gandhara's walls. And lo, the next morning, a magnificent gate appeared where the old one stood. Overjoyed, he ordered the old gate to be destroyed so that no one could ever know of its powers, and so it was forgotten. And that is how the great gate of Gandhara was lost to time. Now Prince Dana grew into a mischievous boy, loved by all the people of Gandhara. But as he grew older, he noticed that all the other kids in the kingdom played near the great gates but never inside them. When he asked his mother why, she told him that these gates were magical, having the power to bring anyone who entered them face to face with their deepest fears. She said, when the great gate at the southern wall was opened, all the merchants cried, because each time they passed through, they were shown piles of gold that they could never earn. The gatekeepers at the eastern gate would weep, for when they stepped through, they saw the armies of their greatest enemy just beyond the walls. And those who passed through the northern gate would go mad, for it showed them the endless, terrifying expanse of the mountains and valleys. One day, Dana decided he wanted to see for himself what lay behind the mighty gates. He called all the children of the city to gather in front of the west gate and announced, "Whoever can get me through this gate will be rewarded with half my kingdom." Immediately, the children set about trying to open the gate, pulling, pushing, and shoving each other aside. One particularly stout child finally managed to open it a crack. But before he could slip through, Dana grabbed his tunic and pulled him back. "Wait," he said, "what did you see?" The child hesitated, then whispered, "I saw a vast desert without end." Startled, Dana ran inside the city walls, sure that his mother was right. But he couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious desert beyond the gate. Every night he dreamed of endless shifting sands, and each morning he woke up yearning to see it for himself. So he put on one of his servants' tunics and, taking a wooden hammer with him, went out the west gate. No one saw him leave, for the guards were busy chasing butterflies that had flown through the opening. As soon as the gate was closed, Dana began to bang on it with all his might. Startled, the butterflies flew away, and the guards rushed to the gate to see what had happened. But since they couldn't see inside, they had no idea that it was the prince making so much noise. All they could hear was a small voice crying, "Let me out! Let me out!" Concerned that whatever was on the other side of the gate might be dangerous, they decided it best to wait for the king to come and inspect it. So they posted a guard to watch the gate and returned to their posts. Now, meanwhile, Prince Dana was getting rather bored of being trapped inside the gate, and banging on it only produced angry shouts from the guards, which was no fun at all. Just as he was considering giving up and finding another way out, he noticed a narrow gap between the bottom of the gate and the ground. Slipping inside, he found himself in a dark tunnel. Holding his breath, he crawled forward until he reached the end and pushed his way out. To his surprise, he found himself in a small garden filled with exotic flowers and trees laden with ripe fruit. Sitting on a nearby stone was a beautiful woman who was fast asleep. Dana crept closer and noticed that she was carrying a basket. Peeking inside, he saw the most exquisite golden palace he had ever seen. Realizing that this must be the place that the woman was guarding, Dana picked up the basket and ran as fast as he could towards the east gate. The guards, seeing a young prince running wildly towards them, flung open the gate and bowed before him. "My lord, what brings you here?" Dana, still out of breath, said, "I am looking for my mother. Have you seen her?" "We haven't, my lord," replied the guard captain. "But why don't you ask the ladies tending the royal gardens? They have seen her ladyship." Thanking him, Dana hurried to the gardens, but on the way, he walked straight into his sister, Princess Suhani. She looked down at the basket and asked, "What's in it?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said, hoping that his sister wouldn't try to take the basket off him. "Oh, just show me," she insisted. So Dana lifted the basket up, and as soon as his sister saw it, she screamed, "Run, Dana! That is a magical palace, and we must not touch anything that belongs to the fairies." Before Dana knew what was happening, his sister had snatched the basket from him and dashed towards the west gate. Again, the guards hurriedly opened the gate, and she disappeared inside. As soon as they closed it, however, they heard a loud crash and the sound of breaking glass. Alarmed, the guards rushed to the western gate and banged on it, yelling for whoever was inside to come out. But the only reply they got was more crashing sounds and muffled screams. Fearing that something terrible had happened, the guards ran to tell the king. When he heard what had happened, King Shurasena's face turned ashen. Knowing what would happen if they didn't do something quickly, the guards immediately set to work barricading the gate with large stones and wagons. Then they ran to find the king's best blacksmith and ordered him to come quickly to the gate. Meanwhile, Prince Dana was searching everywhere for his sister, fearing that she would never be the same again after touching a fairy's magic palace. Finally, he found her kneeling by the gate, sobbing uncontrollably. "Suhani, what has happened?" he asked. "The palace," she whispered. "It's gone. It turned into a thorny bush and I broke the magic mirror that was inside. Now the fairy will be very angry and I fear she will turn me into a frog." Hearing this, Dana felt a surge of anger towards those who had hurt his sister. He called the blacksmith over and asked him, "Do you think you can make me a shield that will protect me from any harm?" "Of course, my lord," he replied, "if you can give me enough time." But Dana wasn't willing to wait. "Make it quickly," he demanded, "or my sister may be turned into a frog." The blacksmith wasted no time and soon had forged a sturdy shield for the prince. Then, taking a deep breath, Dana approached the gate and shouted, "Let me through!" Startled by his sudden demand, the guards hastily moved the stones and let him pass. He took one look at the smashed gate and knew that the fairy must have used all her powers to protect herself. But he was determined to help his sister, and so charged forward, swinging his shield. Thorny vines snaked out from the bushes and lashed against his shield, but not a single scratch appeared on it. Encouraged, he continued forward until he reached the center of the magical garden. There in front of him stood a beautiful fairy, her wings shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow. Behind her was a small cottage made entirely of gingerbread and candy. As soon as she saw the damage that had been done to her home, the fairy raised her magic staff and shouted, "You shall never leave this garden alive." Dana was unfazed. "Then I will die trying to help my sister," he shouted back. The fairy hesitated, surprised by his bravery. "Very well," she said. "If you're so determined, I will give you a chance to win your reward. Do you see that gingerbread house?" Dana nodded. "If you can take me to its roof without letting any of its sweets fall off, I will allow you to take whatever you want from my palace and restore your sister to normal." Dana agreed, and the fairy handed him a small box. "This box," she said, "must not be opened until you have reached the roof. If you open it too soon, the spell will be broken and you will lose." Taking the box, Dana promised to do his best. The moment he touched the gingerbread house, however, the smell of sweet cinnamon and sugar filled his nostrils, and he felt his resolve begin to crumble. He tried to focus on the task ahead, but the more he resisted, the stronger the smells became, until finally he couldn't stand it any longer, and he opened the box. Immediately, the fairy's magic enveloped him, and he felt himself shrinking until he was no bigger than a mouse. She then tossed him into a nearby flower pot and covered it with soil. Many hours passed, and when Dana finally emerged from the flower pot, he found himself in the middle of a bustling market. People bustled past him, completely unaware of his presence. At first, he was quite scared, but soon realized that no one could see or hear him. So he began exploring the city, eating scraps of food and staying out of the way of carts and dogs. Now, it so happened that at that very moment, the king was holding a competition to see who could get through the city gates the fastest. Many brave soldiers tried, but none succeeded. Dana, watching from the sidelines, thought he could do it easily, so he scurried over to the west gate, stretched out his arms like planks of wood, and refused to let the people pass until they made a mock knocking sound. Some parents encouraged this, believing it taught their children discipline, while others groaned, wishing the king had been born with a love of doors rather than gates. You might have seen this video before. It's about an ancient civilization called Gandhara that built these incredible gates, but then they disappeared without a trace. And while exploring their ruins, I found something very strange. Meanwhile, the scribes of the kingdom documented everything. How many bricks formed each arch, how long each pause lasted during the imaginary swing, and even the average sigh of travelers forced to wait. These records, bound in leather, filled entire libraries, proof of Gandhara's devotion to pointless precision. This is a story from the great city of Hastinapura, the capital of Gandhara, where the mighty river Ganges splits into 7 streams. And like all good stories, it starts with a king on his deathbed. This was King Suddhodana. He ruled over the kingdom of Gandhara, which lay at the edge of the known world, where the Himalayas met the plains of the Punjab. His kingdom was small but mighty, holding its own against the nomadic hordes of Central Asia and the merchant princes of the South. But now he was dying, and he needed an heir. And he had 2 sons, the elder, Prince Chaitanya, strong and ruthless just like his father, and the younger, Prince Neelam, a dreamer who loved poetry and the company of holy men more than war elephants and hunting expeditions. In fact, Neelam was so dreamy that when Gandhara faced a war with the kingdom of Takshashila, he was nowhere to be found. When his father asked him where he'd been, Neelam replied, "I was talking to a sage, father." "And what did the sage have to say?" asked Suddhodana suspiciously. "That this world is full of suffering, and our duty is to put an end to it," said Neelam. "Nonsense," roared the king. "The world is full of challenges, and your duty is to face them." He turned to his advisors. "My eldest son will succeed me. He will continue our legacy." Neelam bowed his head, defeated. That was how it should be. A king's son should fight for his kingdom. A poet's son should write about the kingdom. But Neelam wasn't any ordinary prince. He couldn't accept defeat. So that night he slipped out of the palace and met a sage in secret. And the sage told him how to win his kingdom back. By studying the ancient texts, by performing penance, by taming his mind. Neelam followed the sage's instructions to the letter. He meditated under a pipal tree for years until one day he achieved enlightenment. Then he returned to the palace, not as a defeated son, but as a holy man. and he renounced the world and became the spiritual advisor to the king. Now, this might seem like a sad ending for our young prince, but Gandhara was at peace during his brother's reign, and he had all the time in the world to study the scriptures. Plus, he still had his younger brother, Prince Jayatissa, who was so naughty that Suddhodana often sent him to Neelan for some spiritual guidance. Now Jayatissa was just 7 years old when one day he came running to his uncle, breathless and scared. "Uncle, uncle, please save me," he cried. "Why?" asked Neelan. "Father is going to make me practice sword fighting." "But you don't have to do it," said Neelan. Amused. "You can just tell him that you're unfit to be a warrior and that you want to become a poet instead." Jayaditya looked at his uncle with wide eyes. "But all Gandharan boys learn sword fighting. What will people say if I don't?" "That's your problem, not mine," said Neelan. But Jayaditya burst into tears. Seeing this, Neelan sighed and pulled his nephew into a corner. "Listen, I have a plan. You tell me how long your lessons are, and I'll teach you how to make them twice as long." Intrigued, Jayatissa told his uncle about his daily sword fighting practice. "It lasted for 2 hours. "Good," said Neelan. "Then you tell your father that you need 4 hours to prepare yourself mentally for your practice, and after that you can practice for another 2 hours. Jayaditya repeated what his uncle had told him and waited for his father's reaction. Suddhodana was furious. "How dare you waste my time? Get out!" he shouted, and he threw Jayatissa out of the palace. The little prince ran to his favorite spot near the river Ganges, sat on a stone, and started crying. Neelan came to him and said, "See, I told you it's easy." Jayatissa wiped his tears. "But I don't want to be a coward," he said. "You're not a coward," said Neelan. "You're my hero. By making your practice last longer, you freed yourself from doing it. That's wisdom." The young prince looked up at his uncle with admiration. "Can I try it again?" he asked. "Sure," said Neelan. "Go ahead." So Jayatissa returned to the palace and told his father that he needed 8 hours to prepare himself for his 2-hour sword fighting practice. Suddhodana was apoplectic. "Get out!" he roared, and he threw the prince out of the palace again. Once more, Jayatissa ran to Neelan, who was waiting for him near the river. "Uncle," he said, "father threw me out of the palace again." "Good," said Neelan. "Then you tell him that you need 16 hours to prepare yourself for your 2-hour practice." Jayatissa rushed back to the palace and told his father about his new requirement. Suddhodana was hopping mad. "Get out!" he thundered, and he chased Jayatissa out of the palace. As the king watched his son disappear into the distance, Neelan stepped out of the crowd. "Brother," he said, "why do you torment the boy so much? Let him become a poet." Suddhodana turned to his youngest brother, his face red with anger. "What business is this of yours? Mind your own life." Very well," said Neelan, "but you won't be able to sleep tonight because the boy is sleeping under the open sky." Suddhodana waved his hand dismissively. "Be gone!" Neelan sighed and left the courtyard. That night, when the king went to bed, he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed thinking about Jayatissa sleeping in the cold. So he got up, put on his clothes, and went to find his youngest son. He searched the whole city, but he couldn't find Jayatissa anywhere. Then he went to Neelan's hut. The door was locked, so he kicked it open and barged inside. "Where is he?" he demanded. "Who?" asked Neelan innocently. "Jayatissa," snarled the king. "Where have you hidden him?" "I haven't seen him since this morning," said Neelan. The king knew his brother was lying, but he didn't know where Jayatissa was. So he spent the whole night wandering around the city. In the morning, he returned to the palace exhausted and humiliated. He had no idea where his son was. Suddhodana summoned all his ministers and announced, "Whoever finds my son will be rewarded with half my kingdom." The ministers fanned out across the land searching for the missing prince. After a few days, one of them returned with good news. He found Jayatissa living in a cave outside the city. Not only that, the villagers had built a shrine in front of the cave and were worshipping him as an incarnation of the god Shiva. "What sorcery is this?" cried Suddhodana. "How can a 5-year-old be worshipped as a god?" Neelan smiled mysteriously. "Because he taught us how to live." Meanwhile, the scribes of the kingdom documented everything: how many bricks formed each arch, how long each pause lasted during the imaginary swing, and even the average sigh of travelers forced to wait. These records, bound in leather, filled entire libraries, proof of Gandhara's devotion to pointless precision. One day, Gandhara fell under the rule of King Kanishka, who brought Buddhism to the region. His empire stretched from Afghanistan to India and Nepal, and he made Gandhara the center of his kingdom. But soon, invaders from Central Asia destroyed Gandhara, looted its cities and burned its libraries. Most of Gandhara's history was lost forever. Historians know about Gandhara's love for numbers because of a few clay tablets and coins that survived the invasion. One of them, the Bull of Kanishka, shows a man wearing a hat and a coat sitting on a throne. He holds a scepter in one hand and is surrounded by mythical creatures. His face is missing, but historians believe it was smashed off on purpose to erase the memory of the last king of Gandhara. So there's a lesson in this story. If you don't record your history, others will destroy it. And if you let your ego get the better of you, you might lose everything. Last time we talked about the lost gates of Gandhara, one of India's ancient kingdoms. Some time has passed since then, and it seems that the king has gotten wind of our talking about his kingdom's lost glories, and he's not happy. You see, ever since our last discussion, the king's courtiers have started competing with each other to come up with the most elaborate explanation as to why there are no doors in the king's palace. The king is getting increasingly annoyed by this, but he's also curious to hear what these learned men have to say. So he asked one of his ministers, "Why do you think there are no doors in my palace?" The minister replies, "Your Majesty, there is a lesson in this for all of us. You see, when a ruler is truly just and benevolent, his subjects never feel the need to close the doors to their houses. They leave them open so that if the king ever walks by, he can step inside and share their joys. This is the real meaning behind the open doorways of Gandhara, Your Majesty." The king is impressed by this answer. He thinks for a moment. Then he says, "Well, yes, that's true. But I've always wondered what would happen if someone were to sneak into my palace through these open doorways and steal something valuable. Would your answer still hold then?" The minister stammers, unsure how to respond. The king continues, "Never mind. Let the next one try." The next minister steps forward and says confidently, "Your Majesty, there is nothing to steal in your palace because everything of value here is invisible to the eyes of common men. Only those who have realized the truth of life can appreciate the jewels of Gandhara." The king frowns. "What nonsense are you spouting? Are you saying that the wealth and treasures of my kingdom are merely illusions?" The minister hastily replies, "No, Your Majesty, of course not. What I mean is that the true treasures of Gandhara are the spiritual riches of its people. Only the enlightened can perceive the luminosity of Gandhara, which shines forth from every doorway and fills every corner of the kingdom." The king remains unconvinced, but he too is starting to get a little carried away. Very well said, but I think I still prefer solid gold over spiritual luminosity. Let the next one try." Another minister now steps forward and says, "Your Majesty, let me tell you a story. Long ago, two merchants approached the Buddha and asked him to visit their city. The Buddha replied, 'I don't go to cities.' The merchants persisted, so the Buddha agreed. When he arrived, he found that instead of taking him to their city, they had brought him to an empty field. 'You brought me here to teach me what?' the Buddha asked. The merchants replied, 'We wanted you to show us what was in the city, just as you have shown us what is in this empty field.' The Buddha looked at the empty field and said, 'Just as there are no trees in this field, so too is my teaching fruitless for those who do not put it into practice.' Then he disappeared. The ministers turned to the king and asked, 'Did you hear the Buddha speak just now?' The king is confused and asks, 'What are you talking about?' The minister said, 'No, Your Majesty, you can't hear it because you lack faith. But I saw it. The Buddha was telling us that just as there are no trees in this minister's field, so too is his teaching fruitless for those who don't put it into practice. In the same way, Your Majesty, the teachings of the Buddha are fruitless for those who do not follow them. That is why there are no doors in your palace. It is a symbol of the Buddhist practice of non-attachment. By having no doors, you have no attachment to your kingdom, no attachment to your wealth or status or anything else. This is the essence of Buddhism, Your Majesty. Don't you see?" The king looks at the minister and then at the ground. He mutters, "Well, maybe I did get a little carried away with all this talk of Buddhism. I was just trying to be a good Buddhist king, like Ashoka. But it seems I've gone too far. Well, I suppose I'll have to do something about this whole no-door situation now, won't I?" He turns to another minister and asks, "What do you think the reason is for there being no doors in my palace?" The minister thinks for a moment and replies, "Your Majesty, I believe the reason is quite simple. It's just that wood is very expensive these days. With all the deforestation going on, the price of lumber has skyrocketed. It's simply not feasible for ordinary citizens to build doors for their houses, let alone for the king's palace." The king nods his head slowly. Yes, I suppose that makes sense. I knew I should have listened to you from the start. Why did I have to listen to all those other guys? Oh, never mind. Bring me a carpenter. I want to discuss the price of lumber. And so the king spent the rest of the day discussing the price of lumber and the various ways he could save money on construction costs. And everyone in the kingdom rejoiced, for who wouldn't want a thrifty, practical king? And with that, our tale comes to an end. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to join our community where you can listen to more stories like these. Our community is a great place to relax after a long day. We have a friendly community of listeners who are always eager to discuss the stories we tell. So come on in and take a break. You can also support us by becoming a patron. As a patron, you'll have the opportunity to listen to exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. So if you're a fan of our stories and would like to support us while gaining access to exclusive content, consider becoming a patron. You can find the link to our page in the description below. Thank you for listening. In truth, the kingdom had an abundance of wood. Entire forests stretched beyond the river valleys, filled with tall cedar and pine. Carpenters sharpened their tools daily, waiting for royal orders that never came. Instead, they were reassigned to polish bricks or carved stone lions, muttering under their breath about wasted talent. But not one soul questioned the king's wisdom. Everyone knew his intentions. They just didn't know why he was doing it. As the capital grew, so did its need for building materials. And as the king had foreseen, the surrounding forests were being depleted. But what he hadn't anticipated was how quickly his people would use up the timber. It seemed like every day the stockpile of wood in the storage yard shrank by half. What was supposed to last for decades now barely lasted for years. One day, the king summoned his chief carpenter. "I have a task for you," he said, handing the man a sketch. The chief carpenter looked at the drawing and his heart sank. Once again, his skills were being wasted. The king wanted a series of low-relief panels carved along the walls of a new palace. Nothing particularly taxing, but such an enormous undertaking would still require the best part of a year to complete. And given the speed the timber was disappearing from the kingdom, he was unsure if the king would even be pleased with the result by the time they were done. "How long will this take?" the king asked, already knowing the answer. "A year, your majesty," the chief carpenter replied. "Or maybe 2. The king nodded slowly. He could wait. He had waited 24 years after all. He dismissed the chief carpenter, who went straight to his workshop to begin organizing the project. Relief work was more suited to master craftsmen. So instead of assigning teams to individual panels, he decided to carve the reliefs himself. Every morning before sunrise, he would report to the palace and begin carving. At first, the other carpenters watched him curiously, then out of respect, then with envy as he created beautiful works of art while they were relegated to menial tasks. Soon, every carpenter in the kingdom was carving a relief for the great palace walls. Some were assigned to finish the chief carpenter's pieces when he eventually tired. Others were told to carve panels depicting scenes from the king's favorite stories. A few were even allowed to add their own designs to honor the completion of the project. Each man worked diligently, hoping that one day their names would be remembered for creating such magnificent works of art. Yet none of them noticed a change in the forest. Every day when they left their workshops, they walked past the edge of the royal hunting grounds. Inside, tall trees spread their branches towards the sky, blocking most of the sunlight. There was little underbrush, and no animals dared venture inside. To the north of the forest was a high wall that separated the trees from the rest of the city. It had been built during the early years of the kingdom, but no one knew why. Over the years, the townspeople had simply come to accept its presence. Now, as the city grew, the wall became a convenient place to dump trash. Rubbish was tossed over the top, landing in the soft earth below. Day by day, the wall was buried under a growing mound of garbage. One day, a young carpenter named Kieran stopped to admire the work of his father, who had been a court sculptor in the days of the old king. Kieran traced the elegant curves of a long forgotten queen and wondered what stories the palace walls might tell. Then he noticed something odd. One of the cornerstones was loose. As he pushed it back into place, the stone shifted and revealed a hollow space behind the wall. Kieran felt around in the darkness and pulled out a piece of wood. It was smooth and polished, obviously not part of the wall. He pried loose another stone and discovered an arrow. It was about 2 fingers wide and fletched with peacock feathers. Kiran had seen similar arrows during his service in the king's army. These were no longer used. He continued searching and found several more arrows, each identical to the last. All were blunt, as if they'd been used for target practice. Kiran thought of the king's strange behavior and the buried wall. Could these be the reason? He asked permission to carve the easternmost panel. It was far enough away from the king that he wouldn't likely hear any complaints. Then he gathered some supplies and headed to the wall. With a sharp chisel, he began cutting away the dirt and rubbish until he saw the smooth surface of the stone beneath. Carefully, he chiseled out an opening large enough for a man to squeeze through. He handed the chisel to a guard, and together they squeezed through the opening. On the other side, Kiran tripped over a stone step hidden under the dirt. Before him lay a huge underground chamber. Thousands of arrows lay scattered on the floor, along with dozens of bows. On the far side of the chamber stood a woman. She wore simple robes, yet her posture was straight and her chin was held high. When she heard Kiran enter, she turned and bowed slightly. "Who are you?" Kiran demanded, unsheathing his dagger. "My name is Forgotten," she said. "My father was a general of the king's army. When the king became obsessed with the forest, I tried to talk him out of it. He wouldn't listen, so I convinced my father to hide his weapons and lead a rebellion. But before we could act, soldiers loyal to the king discovered our plan. My father died in battle, and I was imprisoned here." Kiran looked at the countless weapons and realized what the king had known all those years ago. His people would run out of wood, but there was more than enough stone to build a great city. He knew what he had to do. Returning to the palace, he slipped past the guards and into the king's study. He found the king gazing at the model of his future palace, lost in thought. "My king," Kiran said, stepping into the light, "you have wasted 24 years preparing for a war that will never happen. Your people are strong, but they are also gentle. They will never go to war unless forced to. You have taken away their freedom, all for nothing." The king turned slowly and fixed Kiran with a cold stare. "I have been preparing for an attack from the north," he said. "These lands were once ours, but our ancestors gave them to the northern barbarians to ensure peace. For 4 generations, we have enjoyed the benefits of trade with the south, thanks to the friendship of the northern barbarians. But recently, messengers from the north have stopped coming. That is why I built my great walls and stockpiled food. I was ready to defend my people, but now it seems I was wrong." He looked down at the model of his future palace, his shoulders slumping. "It doesn't matter," he whispered. "Even if I had known, I would have done the same thing." Kiran stepped closer and laid a hand on the king's shoulder. "It does matter," he said gently. "You may be right about the north, but that doesn't mean you should keep your people trapped here. Let me show you something." Kiran led the king to the wall, ignoring his confused questions. They reached the spot where Kiran had made his opening, and the king stared in disbelief at the chamber within. Then he turned to Kiran, his eyes shining with tears. "Was I really that afraid?" he whispered. "You were once a brave warrior," Kiran said, stepping aside to let the king enter the chamber. "But now you are the greatest carpenter in Gandhara. Come, let us build you a palace of wood and stone." The king nodded slowly, still staring at the weapons in the chamber. "Tell my son to come see me," he said quietly. "I think it's time he learned how to be a king."